Hello and good morning and welcome to the session. Glad you could join me. My name is Jeremy and I'm from Imba Interactive. We are a game audio studio based in Singapore. We started in 2013, so we've been around for 10 plus years. And today's session, we hope to just share the lessons we've learned and what we feel are the common pitfalls, shortcomings, and blind spots so that you don't go through the same mistakes that we have. So this is a pre-recorded session. I will be in Twitch among you. If you have questions, you can leave it there. I believe I can answer it during the session as well. So a little bit of background about my team. We are based in Singapore, but we have actually personnel from all over. We do work with external composers as well as sound designers to basically bring end-to-end audio solutions to game developers. And some of the games we've worked on, you can see here. They span from Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, and of course, Taiwan. And there are games that span from like short dev cycles from 6 months all the way to like maybe 3+ years. So let's get into the main topic. If you're here, you probably know that in game audio, there is the main component of music, sound design, as well as voice. And last but not least, I think the most important is getting all of these into the game, the process of implementation. Right, but between all these main categories, there's also the side of pre-production, production itself, and of course the marketing part of things. So let's put this into a matrix. We are all game devs. We love matrices, I hope. So I think oftentimes people think most of the cost goes into the production, and that might not be wrong. However, before we even hit that stage, a lot that we do as creators and game devs is the whole end-to-end from pre-production all the way to when the game needs to get marketed. From the top, in pre-production, of course we have to cover overall creative direction, technical requirements, budgeting and scheduling. This applies to even the art department, programming department, and every other discipline. Right, under music, this is where you come up with mood boards and the vision for music you would like to come up with. And ultimately in production, you need to consider things like whether you are going for adaptive music. I'll talk more about that later. And if you need to record musicians, you obviously need to budget time and money for that in pre-production. And in sound design, similar process. You come up with sort of references and of course the scope of work needed. And like if you need like hundreds or thousands of sounds, you have to know what is the budget you're looking at and the team that you need to do to accomplish that. Yeah, during production, we'll do things like a Foley. The visual pipeline is important, how sound actually syncs up with the visuals properly and how we can review that and how sound designers can get proper access to the visuals and whatnot. And then on the voice side of things, we have to make sure writing is settled before we go into recording. Yeah, and of course, casting is very important as well. When we work with voice actors, there are a lot of things we need to consider. You probably need a voice director or someone equivalent if you have no experience recording with voice talents. And then at the implementation stage, this is where everything gets into the game engine and we start doing testing. And there is a possible involvement of audio middleware, which I'll talk about later. And then on the marketing side of things, trailers, events, media, merchandise, streamers, soundtrack. From the audio point of view, all these are possible involvement of sound and music, and I think it's often neglected. So in today's session, we'll choose a few things to focus on. We'll talk about the pitfalls and blind spots in pre-production, the possibility of using adaptive music, testing and feedback with our audio team, audio middleware, what is it and how you could possibly make use of it. And then there's a portion of marketing and centered around trailers and whatnot. So let's talk about blind spot 1, failing to structure solid pipeline. So this is basically pre-production, right? Communication and project management pipelines, that's one of the most crucial things to set beforehand. So firstly, establish communication platforms and tracking sheets early. I couldn't emphasize this more. I think it's important that whatever platform you're using, whether Discord, Notion as a wiki or on Slack, you need to have proper channels and structure and make sure everyone knows what each channel is for, where to go for what, and it has to be a place that's conducive for open communication. And then for outsourced teams, especially if you work with an outsourced audio team, I think at minimum, you really have to designate someone to be a liaison between the outsourced team as well as your in-house team. Preferably, it's a producer or someone familiar with game audio and have experience, at least at a very basic level. Having one person being the liaison will definitely help with collating and providing feedback to the audio team as well. And we'll talk more about that later. So let's talk about communication pipelines. It can be as straightforward and simple as one-to-one, like a developer to a sound designer. Literally, it's like a two-man team. It could be, right? But when you have a full-blown communication pipeline with bigger teams, essentially it could look something like this. But you can see here in this illustration, it's sort of centered around the producer and the audio team project manager. So whatever it is, between the producer and the audio side manager, I think there has to be clear expectations set on both sides. The main thing is to communicate about what can be done, what cannot be done within this given time. And there has to be some level of transparency and rhythm going on between the producer and the audio team manager. And then, of course, there will be individuals talking across to each other. The important part is to be prompt in a workplace. That's important. Replying within a certain time and answering questions in a direct manner. Clarity is important, especially when you are communicating in the workplace. Being clear is essential. And of course, if you can't get things through in a message, sometimes having a video or phone call is needed. And lastly, the most important is to be kind. And I think this goes a long way to having a conducive work environment for everyone. Right, next, we have to talk about creative direction and pre-production, right? So my advice is really take your time, meaning not let it drag on forever. However, buffer enough time so that you have ample time to set a direction. Right, so establish and review, and I think people don't do this enough. They sort of leave it to either party to create a direction and we kind of just follow. It's important that everyone on the audio team, as well as the leads, at least on the dev side, actually know why we are going in a certain direction. And at least that will be a minimum, I feel, as a kickoff before we start production. And sometimes I do see teams that sort of skip this or like go through it quickly. Sometimes it's just settled in one message or two on the communication platform, and then production begins. What happens then is sometimes you don't get what you want in production stage, and by then it'll be an arduous task to sort of reverse and start over again. So you have to come up with objectives of why the sound needs to be this way, as well as, of course, we mentioned before, mood boards or like sound and music palettes. So here's some examples. Here's something we've drafted up for one of our projects, the sound palette, the sound design side of things, for example. The red circle kind of represents where we want the sound to be. From here, you can see something a bit cute and subtle. We've put audio references across on the left side also, just to be clear on what the sounds should not be. We sometimes tend to narrow down and think about what it needs to be, but in the exploration and experimentation stage, I think in pre-production, it's important to know what we want and what we don't want as well. So this is just another sound palette. There are videos laid out here so that we can also hear the sound as in case we need to track it back. Here's one for music particularly. And then another example for another BGM that we're working on. So speaking of music, we can talk about the second blind spot, which is devs not actually maximizing the music plus sound combo. So what do I mean by that? Composers can and should work with the sound team, because ultimately what the players hear, they're hearing a whole soundtrack by itself. They don't hear music and then sound effects as a separate matter. Everything comes out as the audio, just as, all components of the art department all end up being one cohesive visual experience. So I think the sound side, definitely the composers should be talking with the sound designers. And what do we talk about? In pre-production, you have to have overall planning and synchronizing things like what the music key is in, what the tempo might be in, and of course, in terms of mix, what kind of approach the composer might be trying so that the frequencies don't clash. And I think this is really important, because sometimes in sound design, we have sounds that might sound musical, and it's important that this doesn't clash with the BGM. And even if at times there might not be a choice, I think we have to be in control of the situation and make sure that we do what we can as much as possible to make sure we know what's happening, how the sounds are interacting with the music. Okay, the next point, which I promise I'll talk about, trying to adopt adaptive or what we call dynamic music into your game. So first of all, games is an interactive medium, so exploit it. I feel like there's no other medium where music can respond to like the consumer, to the player action, except in games. So definitely this is one portion that you really want to get into, rather than just have wholesale BGM and just looping and things like that. I think it will be a missed opportunity, if you don't consider it. And this is mainly coordination between the audio director, audio integrator, as well as the composer. In TGDF itself, there will be a lot more talks regarding how music can enhance your game. So I will not go deep into it, but just to show you a general idea of how adaptive music can be done in games, right? So there are the horizontal concepts where one music comes after another, depending on player action, of course, when you move from one area to another, or perhaps in a battle you have done something special, or you have completed a puzzle and the music changes accordingly and sometimes seamlessly, and they change on the beat and things like that. And when we talk about layers, in a musical arrangement, you have layers that come in and out depending on, again, player action. And some of these might not be outright noticeable by players, but it's something that they feel. And if the game is actually responding to their input, it definitely contributes to immersion. So there are horizontal and vertical concepts, and that's the beginning building block of usually interactive or dynamic music. And of course, you can use both horizontal and vertical techniques, but I think to go deep into it is a topic for another talk. So talking about implementation of music, blind spot number 3. I think many teams actually underestimate audio implementation. All right. First of all, we've established game audio does not stop at production. In fact, implementation is like, I would say 50% of what goes into game audio in general. You can have the best music, the best sound effect, but if it's not implemented correctly, not synced to the right frame of visuals, for example, the whole thing might just fall flat. And of course, game audio implementation is not just about playing sounds, stopping sounds, looping sounds, playing sounds at random and changing their volume. It's really a lot more complex than that, especially if you have a game that has a dev cycle beyond 1 year. Every time sound designer has a desire to do any sort of audio behavior, they have to bug that programmer just to do it for them. And I think if your programmer is not solely in charge of audio implementation, that might be problematic, because one of two things can happen. One is your programmer might get overwhelmed. The other thing is your sound designer or composer might just decide that, okay, I don't have the facility to implement what I want to achieve, so I'm just going to do something simple that takes less work overall. And I think that's ultimately limiting the possibility of how interactive your game can sound. So let me introduce you to audio middleware if you haven't heard of it. So on one side, you have a digital audio workstation, or we call DAW. This is where, programs like Logic, Audition, Pro Tools, they output WAV files basically. This is where our sound designer and composer do their production mainly. And then on the other side, you have your game engines, which is of course Unity, Unreal, and whatnot. And this is where the technical staff normally work with. And why audio middleware is called that way is because it sits right in the middle. All right. It actually helps sound designers and technical sound designers to basically do whatever they want, more or less, with the audio and have it behave and talk to the game engine in a way that makes sense also in a technical way. So two of the most popular ones out there is Fmod and Wise. Of course, there are more audio middleware out there, but these are the two most popular ones. So let's talk about why you would consider using audio middleware. First of all, I think I need to quash the worry that it's something added onto the engine, a technical point of view. Like, people are afraid that it might break something. But in our experience in the past decade, there have been very little issues with technical integration between Wise Fmod with Unreal and Unity at least. So I think that's something that you don't have to worry too much about. There is a licensing cost involved, which I'll show you later. However, I definitely think the cost is justified if you can liberate the sound team as well as save time from the programming team. And it also could be free if your game is actually small enough and you're as a sort of an indie license that costs you nothing to actually use Wwise or Fmod in your game. So as mentioned before, it enables the audio team way more control, over the audio. This is the way it should be, I feel. Like as an audio team, we need to be responsible on how the audio ultimately sounds like and not leave it to someone else to determine what happens. And then it saves a lot of time on your tech team, especially if your tech team have no experience dealing with advanced audio integration. I'm sure every programmer knows how to play and loop a sound and whatnot. But beyond that, it's a little bit difficult and it will be time consuming for them to write custom tools or code every time we want some sort of advanced audio behavior. So basically, yeah, with audio middleware, programmers only need to be concerned with what we call hooks. Right, basically code that calls for an event. So when something happens in game, basically you just tell Wwise or Fmod, and then on Wwise and Fmod side, the sound designers will do whatever complex behavior that we'll need to do. Perhaps EQ a sound, perhaps a layer 3 or 4 sounds together, stop one sound and play this sound instead, so things like that. When it comes to dynamic music that we've talked about earlier, UE and Unity's audio engine simply cannot compare with middleware because when it comes to music, the beats per minute, the tempo is really important. And this is something neither UE or Unity's audio engine have a way to do natively. We've tried with different teams and having to code in something that is BPM aware is really difficult. So if you want to do anything related to dynamic music, I would highly recommend you actually work with Wwise or Fmod or any of other audio middleware that might be out there. So Wwise, I mentioned, there's an indie license. So if your production budget is less than 250k USD here, for Fmod, slightly better if your development budget is under 600k. So of course, there's many details in the T&C. You have to go to their respective websites, and these things change from time to time. So always check back their website for the final details. Basically, I would say Fmod is better for small teams. If you have a solo sound designer or composer, then I think that will work for most indie games. However, if your team is a little bit bigger, if you have multiple sound designers working on one project, definitely Wwise is more structured for that. Yeah, in fact, Wwise is being used on a lot of AAA games in the past and even currently. So blind spot number 4 is about giving and receiving feedback, especially during the QA and testing stage. So I think for audio, it is important that the team hears the intended behavior of the sounds instead of wave files in isolation. All right, that's very important because firstly, players don't ever hear the sounds by themselves. Yeah. Secondly, if you don't have a trained ear or you can't visualize the final product, it's really a pointless exercise to talk about how this particular wave sound can sound like. Even for music, sometimes, yes, it's you have to review the music piece by piece, but it's very important to imagine in your head, or at least better still, see the visuals with the music and in context of the game. So yes, judge only after syncing to visuals. For that, we normally export sound with minimally video so that clients can review. Better yet, yeah, test it in-game where it will repeat several times and whatnot. By hearing one gunshot sound is really not productive. It's best to hear it behaving in the game where it's actually repeated and how the behavior of it. Do we do pitch variation real time and things like that? That will affect how the sound behaves in game, and I think that's ultimately it's important to hear the sound in context. Yeah, even better yet, listen to a full mix. So yep, better than just hearing one item, actually hear the final product. And actually the mix and how one sound interacts with another is really important. In terms of getting feedback, sometimes there's this thing that happens where, especially to composers, unfortunately, where everyone might be able to hear the music. But the problem is when you get feedback from every single person, it's very disorienting and confusing for the composer or sound designer themselves. So I think that some filtering needs to be done. Number 1, decide who are the key creative decision makers for the music and sound. Normally this would be a lead or a director. or at least a producer, to do the filtering. So collate all the feedback, question some of the feedback if needed before handing it off to your composer or sound designer. That will really help a lot in doing revisions. And yeah, when you have feedback sessions, best to have structure. Yeah, and sometimes a voice or video call works better. I think this has happened to us before. I think especially when we're working remote, there are a lot of people are used to typing long passages of text on the platforms. The problem with that is in text sometimes things can go out of context, or when you don't mean what you say when you're typing. Ultimately, I think it's better that you can hear the music offline, but get onto a call online and you can talk things out verbally. I think that works a lot better for many composers and sound designers. And we move on to the final blind spot that I want to talk about, which is not using audio as a branding tool. So what I mean by that is sort of having the creative side think of the business side of things, which I think it sounds so simple, but it's actually very important. When it comes to trailers, especially indie titles, I think people are often so concerned about cost. But when it comes to marketing, it's not something that you can skimp on. And I'm not sure why audio tends to slip the minds of some developers. Yeah, but basically, your trailer is going to be out there competing with AAA games as well. As the consumer, they don't really bother, or won't understand that, you have a tighter budget, so your trailer sounds like this. So yeah, consider having composers to have rearranged music track for a main trailer, or in fact, have composers do up tracks for any part of your marketing that matters, because in-game tracks have their function inside the game. But when it comes to marketing material, it's a totally different matter. And then this is just a tip for when you're producing trailers, screen capture gameplay without the music, because likely in the trailer you're going to use another backing music track, but you will need the in-game sound effects to sync later. But whether you use it or enhance it is another matter. Right, so which leads me to this point. Definitely beef up the sound design in your trailer despite having recorded in-game sound, because like I mentioned, when you're cutting a trailer, the sound that you captured from in-game might not be final. That's one. Secondly, in a trailer, you need to wow and capture attention. Therefore, you definitely need to do some enhancement to the sound design as well. And then voiceovers, if very much possible, you should consider it and make sure it's well scripted. And yeah, importantly, it hooks the audience better even if they're not looking at their screens. Just imagine people see an advertisement or a trailer, sometimes they'll just put their device aside. If it's just the music and sound effects, it does provide some information to some context. But what players cannot ignore is really voiceover and spoken text. Just to show you one of the sessions we have for the sound editing. In fact, all the tracks here are collapsed already. There's close to 100 tracks. And on top, we've broken down markers for cuts in the trailer, important points to hit and things like that. So I just want to show the sort of effort we put in behind a trailer only. It's just like Hollywood, there are an entire trailer industry. And I think when it comes to marketing our games, yeah, we shouldn't ignore this portion of how you want to push your game out. All right, so here's a video to illustrate how a trailer can sound with just music and sound effects, and as well as a full stack of music, sound effects, and VO.
Of Spheria is in peril. The time has come to summon the battle spheres. Slingshot your way to greatness. Strategize your way to victory. Help your friends and smash your enemies. Collect, fuse, and evolve the perfect team to join in the fight for Spheria. Battle Spheres, now on Google Play and the App Store.
All right. By the way, this is a really old game, so don't need to try and find it. I don't think it's online anymore. But yeah, hopefully you get my point about having voices in your trailers as much as possible. The other point about using audio as a branding tool is, of course, having your music on streaming platforms. So if you haven't done that or tried that with any of your games, I think you should try it out, because of course the music can be a gateway to your game as a means of marketing as well. So sometimes releasing the music early so that it could be one of the attraction point for players to get into your game. Yeah, it's not that hard. I think any composer out there should have a good idea of how to do this. So and then of course get the relevant rights needed to clear for social media and live stream. And this is quite a big topic in recent years. And of course there's many ways to do that. You should talk to your composer. And of course consider revenue share model between developers and the composers. Right? If you are a composer, you can start the discussion with your developer. If you're a developer, you can also approach your composer. Yeah, I think it's definitely a sort of a win-win situation. And finally, I would like to summarize and recap what we've went through with some audio acronyms I came up with. So always understand development inputs and outputs, right? So number one, establish communication pipelines and creative briefs before production begins, and really budget enough time to do this. And then music should be interactive in an interactive medium like games, right? So exploit it and maximize that. And then game audio implementation is essential. Consider using middleware and definitely look into it. Take the time to look into it rather than not. And then lastly, have a constructive feedback structure, especially when working with an outsourced team. Avoid underestimating or devaluing your IP and your outreach capability. So basically, don't underestimate your intellectual property and don't shortchange it, right? Yeah, think about how you can maximize audio as a marketing tool. Approach your sound designers, your composers, to also advise on the trailers, even if they're not working on it. Consider selling your game OSTs as a standalone. Well-scripted voiceovers can be very effective in various platforms. So not just trailers that we talked about, but really in all sorts of marketing material and outreach that you have. Alright, so I'm open to questions that, of course, I hope I've already answered some on Twitch. You can also reach out to us via hello@imbainteractive.com if you have more detailed questions or would like to get some consultation on your games. If I have more links, I will be putting up in the chat as well. And of course, thank you for your time and being with me for the last 25 minutes. I hope to see you around, and all the best for the games you are developing. Bye-bye.